All right. So we are indeed going to talk about naming tonight. Are there any questions? Matt, you had a mentoring question before we get started?
Yes, I'm so sorry that I was thinking about the wrong.
No, totally fine. I'm glad I caught it accurately.
Yes. So my mentee that I have for ABA 2 and Practicum 2, the only things that she has sent me for Practicum 2 are her research summaries and her annotated bibs. She said that was what Dr. Cohen advised her to do. I'm seeing some
Yep.
not, so I think that's
Yep.
kind of consistent. So I've been turning in my ABA 2 assignments just as I'm giving her the feedback. I turn it in. For my practicum assignments, there's only drops for the other not AB research summary related
Just get it in
assignments.
there.
So
Yeah.
just put it in those
Yeah.
spots.
Yeah. I'll figure it out. I'm gonna have to do my own like magic work grading it, but I'm not, you know, the biggest concern is like if you're getting nothing, just get it all in there and I will be able to sort it out. I'm you, I'm less concerned about things going in specific spots. I'll be able to track how much feedback you've given, basically.
Okay.
That'll be easy enough. This is the first time I've set it up this way. I don't think it's the best way to do it. And Dr. Cohen, obviously, from the start of the very start of the semester to now, changed how she's doing it a little bit. She figured out what works for her, what's on Moodle at all. That's definitely less of a like a stickler concern of mine, for sure.
Okay.
All
I
right.
just make sure.
Cool. All right. Any other mentoring questions?
I got one.
Yeah, go ahead.
So she's only, like Maddie said before, she's only been sending me, because I have her for both classes, but she's only sending me research summaries from both classes. But so we are just submitting what we want your feedback on. So let's say I give feedback, we're only submitting like the 10 research summaries, like from our best feedback or whatever that you want us to look at.
Yeah, and I think it makes the most sense to pick one class for you to submit for like a line of things. So don't pick and choose the research summaries between the two. Like do the 547 research summaries and call that good for that piece. Just so I can see the progression that you're making as well. Okay. Cool. All right.
I have a question, Dr. Shaman.
Go ahead.
So I'm having a difficult time with the mentoring activities because I don't have very much to go off of because of my situation. And so what would you like for me to do?
Honestly, Isaac, let me take a look tomorrow. I'm not going to have it in me to do it tonight, but let me take a look tomorrow about like kind of where you are in particular with what you've given and how I would look at that, and then I'll get back to you and we can talk about that.
For sure, perfect. I mean, I think we have several research summaries and some a quiz, and so I mean, I have some things that I have seen improvements on, but other than that, it's nothing like super substantial. I mean,
for shattering. Yeah. Okay. All right. Cool. All right. Anything else?
I do have one more, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So for mentoring activity 4, so is that just the same? So it's identify one area that your mentee has not responded well to feedback. Is that kind of like the same thing with the behavioral change? But so like the same format that I did. So for the behavior change, I just put like, okay, she changed her behavior within her abstract. But now for this one, you're trying to see where she's lacking, kind of. So like pinpoint, like, okay, this is our first research summary, this is her last, and she's still not given that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, just wanted to make sure.
Exactly. And then, if I don't know when that due date was, so it was like it just passed. If you need additional time to implement the plan, so to speak, and you want to wait on that, that's absolutely fine. All right. So like if you're just looking at it like, oh, I definitely have evidence that she hasn't improved, and here's my contact, but I haven't had time to implement the plan yet, take another week or two and see if you can get that change put in there. Okay.
And in regards to, sorry, Maddie, and
That's all right. You can finish this question.
implementing the plan, can that be like via email? Like, hey, I'm seeing you're still having struggle with this. Let me help you. So
Yeah.
and screenshot that email and send it in.
Yeah, absolutely. Even if it's like, hey, I've seen this a couple of times. Why don't we go back and forth on like, here's your last abstract. You keep going with your research summaries, but let's work on this one abstract and so go back and forth a couple of times until we get it right. Like give some corrections and some feedback and some independent responses and see if you can get it and like submit that. That would be an awesome one. Okay. Maddie, you had another one?
Yes,
Another
really
question?
fast because I really want to get to naming.
Yeah.
So I have two mentees for 3 different classes.
Yeah.
And one of them has been sending me more that I can keep up with, which is great. Like I'm just trying to get her the feedback as quickly as I can. But I have another one who's only sent me one thing all semester. And I provided the feedback and I haven't heard back. And I've been checking in weekly, but I haven't heard anything. So like I still have another participant. I still have another mentee where like I'm still getting everything I need. She's getting what she needs. Should I email you about the second one? Like
Definitely.
perfect.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, for sure.
I don't want to sound selfish. Like I'm still getting what I need from the other one, but I want to make sure that you're aware of the other one.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And then I can line up with what we're seeing on our side.
Okay.
And yeah, go from there. Definitely. Yeah.
All right.
Okay, cool. Okay, sharing screen. All right. So why is it that I didn't want anyone doing a naming study this year? So let's just get this out first. Naming is critically important. I think we can all accept that. When naming is induced, it should drastically change the way we interact with a child and the way a child interacts with the environment. Kind of square one. Without defining naming, without doing any of that stuff, which we're going to be doing. What naming is not is simply a byproduct of multiple exemplar instruction. Okay. Are they related? Yes. Are they related in simple ways? No. Is it an easy thing to do? No. Do we mess it up a whole lot? Yes. Do we have a robust, the field, have a robust understanding of what's going on? No. All right. Naming there's so many different places to start, but naming as a concept is one of the most complex concepts in the field, to the point where many in the field won't touch it with a 10-foot pole, right? Some of the best researchers out there, I would include Dr. Greer in that. I would include Kyo Miguel in that, Anna Pettis' Sarah Lechago, I think is her name, out of North Texas. Some of the best researchers in the field devote their careers or have devoted their recent careers to naming. And to say there's no consensus on what it is, how we get there, and what it does is an understatement. It is a big concept. It is too big for one term, which is why we now have 15 different terms. It is still 25 years later, much more grounded in theory than it is in conclusive data. What Horn and Lowe put out in 1996 still checks all the behavioral boxes. But figuring out how to measure all the components of what they are talking about is very much a challenge. And it is a challenge that I'm not so sure we will be able to overcome until behavior analysis and neuroscience are able to work together, and we can do some naming probes with some kids with some electrodes on top of their head, and we actually see what's going on. What complicates that even further, and let me see what I have here for next week, is that after Horn and Lowe wrote their paper, another group of brilliant researchers responded to it and then developed a line of research based on a response to it that basically said naming's all well and good, but it doesn't really matter. Let's talk about this other thing called relational frame theory. And everyone fell in love with that. Everyone kind of went, what? And looked this other way towards relational frame theory. And what relational frame, we're going to talk about relational frame theory next week, but relational frame theory, the reason there was this massive head shift was because relational frame theory presented an alternative way of defining one as verbal. Completely different. Verbal behavior was no longer mands and tacts and interverbals and conversational units. Verbal behavior was something totally different. Horn and Lowe and those that followed the naming theory identified naming as what allowed one to be verbal. Maybe. Show me the data on this subjective idea. But that was still based on Skinner's definition of being verbal. Relational frame theory said, we don't care what Skinner said. So that was this radical piece. And it came within the years after right as the research team, the Horn and Lowe research team, was starting to provide data showing that naming was a thing that was testable, that had meaning to it. So in the last 8 to 10 years, I don't want to say relational frame theory has fizzled out, but though the Steve Hayes and Linda Parrott Hayes, they've kind of gone in a different direction. So if you're familiar with those names, those are the relational frame guys. And people are starting to come back and look at naming, and that's where Dr. Kyle Miguel's research and Dr. Greer's research and Dr. Pettisdotter's research has really started to come to fruition. And the advances that we're seeing there are significant. All of this to say, at a clinical level, what we do with naming, we're fine with the probe, but then we just put in some MEI, and then we do another probe, and sometimes we have naming induced, and sometimes we don't, and then we don't really know what to do with it, and we walk away. And that's not what naming's about. That's not what the intervention's about. The probe has flaws in it. Some of those are, some of those flaws are conceptual, some are applied, some are experimental in nature. And the intervention itself has a lot of holes in it. And most importantly, we have a lot of data to show that multiple exemplar instruction by itself isn't going to get a kid to the finish line. There have to be other things in place in order for MEI to be effective. So when we sit down and we start to say, oh, I think this kid has the prerequisites for naming, the reason I put the kibosh on all of you doing it, or on any of you doing it, was we don't know, as a field, we don't know how to measure for all those prerequisites. So us as a small cohort, including myself as your professor, I can't sit here confidently and say that kid has the prerequisites for naming. And therefore, I can't be confident that MEI is going to be effective. And it's such an important capability that I don't want us to be in a position where we're fiddling around with it for 2 months trying to learn. I'd rather that we spend the time, we talk about it, we research it, we look at it, we read about it, and hopefully get to a point where we can look a little bit more critically at who our participants are, how we should intervene, should we intervene, and if we do intervene and are, cross our fingers, successful, what do we do next? All right. So that's my 20-minute spiel on why none of you are allowed to do naming yet. Okay. So that all being said, what is naming? Anyone want to take a stab?
I want to try.
Go.
They'll probably tell me I'm wrong, but that's okay. I've been waiting for this all semester. Okay, so recently I read this and I thought it made a lot of sense. So it's the transformation of establishing operations across untaught listener and speaker behavior.
Okay. I hadn't heard the establishing operations part before.
Dr. Finiup, I think is how you say his name. Finiup in an article he published late last year in October.
I like that. Good. So what is happening at the core of that definition? What do those words mean? What are we going for? Say that again.
Incidental learning.
Incidental learning. Good. So we have the opportunity to acquire untaught behaviors. Right? Simple. Yeah? Yeah. Okay, we're done. No.
Dr. Shaman, can I give an example and maybe you can
absolutely
debunk it or not? I'm thinking more like if a child, if an adult or a parent like tacks a fork, the child like picks up the fork and then starts eating, like acts like he's eating. And then as a function of multiple or exemplar instruction, like this, really what happens is like the student starts expanding like stimulus classes, his or her stimulus classes. And so like, for example, like if a child sees like a red ball and then having never seen a red ball, and then all of a sudden he picks up the ball when the mom says like, where's the ball? Like, am I on the right path or am I getting it mixed up?
Okay. So yes and no. All right. And this is where naming gets to be really challenging. Naming is about incidental language acquisition. It's about equivalence. It's about stimulus classes. It's traditionally about listener and speaker behavior. But when you go back and you read, has anyone read the Horn and Low paper? I know, Maddie, you said you've tried to get through it a couple times. Courtney, a couple of you.
I haven't.
Yeah.
I don't know how much I've comprehended, but I've read the words many times.
Yeah. I think I read the words 3 or 4 times before I comprehended like a third of it. I've probably read that paper 8 or 9 times. And it's definitely time for me to go back and read it again. When you go back and you read Horn and Low, yes, there's this focus on listener and speaker for sure. And they talk about the joining of the listener and speaker. But throughout the paper, they talk about naming as this critical, what's the word I want? It's critical juncture for language acquisition. And language is more than just a tact, right? So there has to be these other, sorry, my cat's going crazy. I don't know if you guys can hear it or not. Laura's like, yep, it's annoying. Language is more than just the name of the thing. And that's actually why especially with how the research, not the research, but the applied aspect of naming has gone, I dislike that tact, because when we think of the name of something, we think of a tact. And it's so much more than that. So Isaac, when you're asking about function, is that the core of what naming is referring to? No. But is function attached to the language experience? Absolutely. And can you substitute function for, say, speaker behavior? Can it be a joining of listener and speaker by a function? Can you show a child what to do with a stimulus instead of give them the name and have them behave? It's a production behave. Function is a production. It's expressive. If you want to use the original terminology, expressive and receptive, or not an original, sorry, the adapted terminology of expressive and receptive, it's expressive. You are putting something out there. So by all means, it has the potential to encompass functionality. There is a Claire Cahill's dissertation, and I can't remember if it got published or not, looks at the relationship between naming and function. And there, not surprisingly, is a relationship. Okay? So what do we have at the core of naming? Naming, to me, is the result of experience, of specific experiences that allow for one stimulus to control multiple responses related to the name of the stimulus. So Isaac, I think you're absolutely right when you talk about expanding the stimulus class. Maddie, you're absolutely right when you talk about incidental language acquisition. But it's these experiences, and this is what's challenging. The experiences that you have allow you to learn in a new way that you could not learn before. Now, that's exactly the same as all the other capabilities that we've discussed. We talked about generalized imitation. We talked a little bit about possibly listener literacy being there in a capability. But the experience that you are having in naming is, it's pervasive, right? And another reason I struggle with just implementing MEI and saying, yep, we should have naming now, is we're talking about 2.5 to 3 years of complete language experiences that allow for the child to be ready to demonstrate those naming behaviors. Naming behaviors is a question mark in itself. I think that there are definitely naming behaviors. Others would disagree. Those others are much smarter than I am. So you probably have to listen to them until we can figure out a way to say otherwise. What are the experiences? Isaac, you spoke a little bit about the interaction with the caregiver. What are these experiences that we are talking about? What is it that we are trying to emulate in an MEI type procedure? How does an infant get to naming?
So I know we use MEI to provide intensive instruction of a natural experience. So like an infant acquires naming. I know the youngest I've ever read is Dr. Greer's research with 2-year-olds. So maybe by the age of 2, they typically developing 2-year-olds acquire naming like naturally. So MEI is supposed to replicate that at a higher intensity. So naturally, they must contact a model of what something is. So when you're babbling and mom's like, "Oh, you said the," and they have a cup on the table and they're like, "Oh my God, he said cup," and they freak out, and then the baby starts echoing those sounds, and then they end up saying cup. So they're provided with a model, and then through that model, they're able to emit untaught behaviors. The model, and then they have to be able to emit that that verbal operant across different topographies, and then they're able to.
It's challenging, right?
I'm trying to put it into words. It is challenging, but like they're able. I'm trying to think of like the untaught part. So like Isaac's example was really good, but it was like all about the red ball. But like with naming, there's like that change where like instruction about the red ball, they're able to say like, a blue triangle. Like they're able to. It changes to something not taught.
So what's challenging about naming in particular is when you see the behavior that happens as a result of naming, it is not going to look like the instructional history that got you there. Okay? So when you're talking about an instructional history that establishes naming, you're talking about, yes, there are going to be models. So like, ooh, look at this can. It's pink. It has water in it, blah, blah, blah. And I'm talking about the can. I'm a caregiver giving all these language models about the can. The language models, the other information that includes function, that includes color, that includes all this other stuff, that's helping to set the establishing operations. That is saying that this is more than just an item. This has meaning. This has function. This carries things. What's in these things you may want. What the name of this thing can get my attention. It can do all of that stuff. If I just say can, okay, cool, right? But that's not the experience that's happening at a young age. So there's reinforcement through condition reinforcement for voices, condition reinforcement for faces, condition reinforcement for 3D stimuli, condition reinforcement for echoic behavior, for MANS, for tax, for the listener, for auditor. You see where we're going with this, right? So all of those pieces have to be in place. And then the parent starts talking about the can, or the cat, or the dog, or whatever it's going to be, right? That allows for reinforcement to be contacted as the parent is conditioning this. Now the stimulus is conditioned. So now I have a conditioned stimulus, but I don't have any responses. Parent was talking about can, but I'm not responding. I do not yet have untaught behavior. All right. Then the parent says, go get me the can. I get the mouse. No, this is the can over here. Remember, the can's the one that's metal and pink and has water and this and that. And we get the correction. all right? The name of the thing was corrected, and I contacted that correction as a listener. And then maybe later on, there's can, right? So I said, remember the name of this? Dog. No, this one's can. Remember, it's this and that and that. And I go through all the things again. And I get that correction for the speaker behavior. All right. So now, through consequences, that one stimulus is starting to develop joint stimulus control. All right. And eventually, I'm going to choose the can. I'm going to say can, and I'm going to contact reinforcement. And all the while, every time my mom holds up a can, they're going to be saying, oh, remember this one? We had this before. It's pink and it holds water and you drink from it. It's called a can. Can you say can? We echo can. So each time we're coming back to that model, and then we're going out and saying, can you find it? Can you say it? Remember this. Can you say it? Can you find it? Remember this. All with one stimulus. And then the next stimulus. And then the next stimulus. And then the next stimulus. And then this is a pen. You write with it. It's got fun colors. There's a cap, blah, 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 blah. 3 hours later, do you know where the pen is? And because of that experience, I can now go find the pen. Because I've learned to attend to all the critical features of the stimulus in the presence of the name of the stimulus that simultaneously condition the stimulus to select observing responses and allow for listener, and if I'm able to, speaker behavior to emerge. All right. What's different about the listener and speaker, and I hadn't really thought about this before. The listener response in an infant is much more robust than the listener response at a table when we're doing MEI. Why might that be? Why is the listener response, and why is that important? But why might the listener response of a child when the parent says, can you find the pen, be more robust than a child selecting a listener, a response as a listener at the table?
The discrimination effort is much higher.
Exactly.
You're not giving them a size of 3.
Yeah, when you're picking a stimulus out of the environment, right? That's so much more a production response than picking it out of the field of 3. Mm-hmm. Now, when you tell a child to go find a pen or toy or whatever, and it's the first time that they've done this, what might they be doing while they're finding the pen?
Like saying what things are, like kind of like process elimination, like
verbally mediating.
That's not a pen. That's not a pen. That's a phone. Mom told me that was a phone, or like that's a can. I know that's not the pen.
So Larissa, when you're talking about verbally mediating, you're talking kind of like what Maddie just described, right?
Yeah, essentially.
Okay. I think that's pretty close, but I don't think they're doing all the other things. I think they're just saying pen, 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 pen. What's that sound? Larissa, you have a dog there? There we go.
Sorry, what?
Your dog was echoing pen, 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 pen.
Oh, sorry, I was trying to untie her, and I guess I was still unmuted. My bad.
No worries. They're emitting that echoic behavior as they're going to find it, and now I get to argue this more than most people because this was my dissertation. I don't think they're echoing. Yes, Christine. What are they doing?
They're like picturing it in their head.
They're tacting it.
Okay.
They're tacting it. And then when this stimulus appears in their environment and they're tacting it based on what they're seeing, it's no longer a listener response. It's no longer a speaker response. It's a simple match to sample. I see a pen. I see a pen. There's the pen. And now you come back, and it's not the listener response that's reinforced. It's the whole bloody thing. Now it's easy for me to say pen, because I just said it 500 times as I was looking for my match to sample.
So is that, I mean, I know it's like way simplified because I tried to read your dissertation and I like had a lot of questions. I wasn't able to get through the whole thing, but like that's conditioned seeing. Like, is
Yes.
that what you just described?
Yes, so conditioned seeing is seeing in the absence of the thing. All right, so this image is conditioned such that I can see it in the absence of this being here. All right. If I am echoing while I'm seeing it, then I'm tacting what I'm seeing. And that's my speaker response. I think the same thing is happening when you have your kids that say, you know, eggplant, carrot, celery, eggplant, 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 right? When they're tacting it as they come out, and then they go like this, it's right there, the whole thing. Or rather, when for this the listener response, say eggplant, 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 match to sample, not listener, match to sample.
So
When you hold it up, eggplant or celery, eggplant, carrot, no, yes, eggplant, eggplant. They're not just tacting it. That's the difference between naming and a tact. A tact is labeling a stimulus. Naming, I think, is matching it to what you see. Does that make sense? Do you guys see that?
what you see when it's not present?
So if I hold up this, and I'm going to say, what's this? Just because the antecedent doesn't bloody matter. When I hold this up, I have a stimulus class, or sorry, a response class that I am currently responding to through my history of reinforcement of sitting at the table or whatever it is, right? And I am saying the things, not that one, not that one, not that one, that one. That, if I'm scrolling through those responses, there's nothing that would allow me to land on the correct response if all I'm doing is emitting echoic or interverbal behavior. It only makes sense if there's a match to sample.
Like it has to be, there has to have correspondence between
Exactly.
what you're thinking of and
Yes.
or what you're picturing and what you see.
Yes, exactly. So what my dissertation was, and I did make a mistake, I made multiple mistakes. What my dissertation was doing was looking at the relation between how effective a child's drawings of images were in the absence of the image and their demonstration of naming. And what we found was there were no children that had the speaker component of naming that weren't able to draw those pictures. If you had the speaker component of naming, you were able to draw those pictures. If you could not draw those pictures, you did not have naming.
Because, and was your finding that it was because they were emitting a listener behavior, the match to sample, rather than just an echoic?
Yes. So there was no correlation. Evil word, right? I used one. There was no correlation between being able to draw them and listener responding. Some that were able to draw them were able to respond as a listener. Some that weren't able to draw them were able to respond as a listener, because that's listener behavior. That's different. That's different. You're not seeing it, so there's no match to sample happening.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Now, when you go back to Horn and Low, conditioned seeing, or the concept of conditioned seeing, is not the only thing that's in there. Isaac, you mentioned function. I think function can replace conditioned seeing. There are other senses. Hearing, tasting, smelling. Any of you have really good taste or sense of smell? Mine's mediocre at best. My wife's is fantastic. She can smell things in the absence of that being there and tact it based on that smell. Her match to sample for smell is phenomenal. The chefs, the best chefs out there, they can taste everything just by saying the thing. Taste coriander, taste, celery salt, taste whatever. You guys can probably, some of you can probably, if I say taste parsley, you taste parsley, taste pepper, taste salt. You can feel it. It's a conditioned sensory response. I strongly think that is a necessary component to being able to acquire naming, to demonstrate naming, I should say, demonstrate naming. Echoic behavior is too. That has to be there. Doesn't work in the absence of an echoic. Right? Now, what comes first, the chicken or the egg? Do you echo and then see it? You see it and then tact it and it looks like echoic behavior? I don't know. But either way, that's how the auditory response gets from person A to you, to that echoic. You develop the tact. So when we are doing our MEI procedure, there are all these little behaviors that we are starting to look for. How many of you have done MEI where the kid kind of half pays attention, but they get them all right? I've done that one. Do they demonstrate naming? No.
That kind of goes back to what you and I were talking about the other day, that kids they sit down at a table, they know, okay, this is MEI, this is what I have to do, earn my tokens, but then whenever you do the naming experience, nothing.
Nothing.
Okay, what? Like, what do I do now?
What did I talk about with the pen? What did I talk about with the can? They become condition reinforcers for observing responses. When you have a kid with naming, they're looking. They want to know all the things. Just by, if I've conditioned the stimulus to maintain observing responses, but I haven't yet acquired the name, I have an EO to attend to that auditory stimulus. If my conditioned sensory response is not up to par, and I got that echoic, and I'm echoing and I'm echoing and I'm echoing, and I'm looking around the room, oh crap, I don't remember what that pen looked like. I run back to the table. Show it to me again. And then I go out and I find it. Right? So I have to have something to maintain those responses in the absence of a thing. The more something is a conditioned reinforcer for observing, the higher the likelihood that it's going to be contacted through, I don't know the right terminology for this, be contacted through a naming behavior. You have a kid that loves airplanes, right? They're mesmerized by them. They look at all of them. As soon as mom points and says, look, an airplane, the EO is already there to learn the name. Now I can contact it, but I'm looking at one in the absence of one being present. I'm thinking about zoom, 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 zoom. And then one flies overhead, airplane. I never had that behavior, that specific response, never contacted reinforcement. That's your incidental language acquisition. But that doesn't look like what the intervention looks like. That doesn't look like what that instructional history looks like. That's why we do naming with a novel set. That's why naming is that weird other set, right? But we have to be able to know, is the conditioned sensory response present? Is the echoic present? Is the EO present? Before we sit down and say, all right, it's time to do naming. So that brings the next question. Can that experience condition the EO?
So
In other words, if you don't have those prerequisites, can MEI condition it so that you now do through the intervention? I don't know. We don't know. It makes sense to me that it possibly could. Go ahead, Maddie. Sorry, I keep cutting you off.
No, I'm saying, I'm sorry. I misunderstood your question. I thought you were asking, like, can the naming experience, just the probes, induce a missing capability? But that's not.
Next question.
Okay. I'm ready for that one.
If you've read Emma Hawkins' dissertation,
I have, yeah.
she argues that it can.
And
I don't know. I don't know if that's her conclusion. But go ahead.
Kurtzikoff. I'm not really. We've talked about this.
Schmelzkopf.
Saying it right. I've read that one a bunch of times. No, I'm sorry. I'm thinking of the wrong one. Kelly Kleinart.
Kleinart. Yeah.
So she found that if you have unidirectional naming, that the repetition of naming probes can induce untaught speaker behavior.
Okay. Good. So that used to be a huge sticking point. Was we would have these kids that could match and then would get neither listener or speaker response. And then we'd do MEI, and Dr. Gear would be insistent that we not go back and do the match. And we do the listener and the speaker. And we're like, but how on earth would they? Blah, 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 blah. No, just do it, just do it, just do it. I'm not sure where we get with that. But if you have the listener, you do the match or the naming experience, and you get to the listener response, are the foundational pieces there? Maybe at age 4, you do that and you don't get anywhere. And then age 5, you do it again, and you've maybe got some other history. Maybe that conditioned seeing response was not present. Maybe the echoic wasn't strong enough. But now there's some additional reinforcement. You're able, just by going through the probes, you're able to contact it. What's interesting about that is if you repeat probes, now, and here's why this is important. Sorry, I'm like pointing at you guys. If you repeat probes and then do a novel probe and it shows, what does that tell you? I don't know how to lead you guys to this question. I'll just say it. What that starts to say, what that starts to question is the significance of the rotated responding. What all that also starts to question is the significance of reinforcement. Because there's reinforcement in the intervention, but not in the probes. Except where?
The match to sample with a coic
Or
intensive, or the 40 tax.
now
Tax. If you do
in the naming experience, if you do a naming experience, if I just hold this up and say pen,
the
faces,
correspondence,
3D, listener, auditory match, all those things that we spoke about before. That's where the reinforcement lies. All right. So if all of those pieces are there, then that's where your reinforcement is. And again, it goes back to, now I want to know the name of the thing, which is your condition DO. All right. So what all of this is to say is, first of all, there's a lot more that we don't know. All right. I honestly, I love my dissertation. I think it was really, really cool. And I think it added a lot to the field. I got to clean it up and got to get it out there for people to read and attack and build off of, right? But I think it is an important piece to understanding not what can happen as a result of naming, but why naming occurs in the first place, or how naming occurs in the first place. All right. But again, that's the tip of the iceberg. So how do we start to look at all of the extensions of bidirectional naming in these systematic ways? It's not going to be the case that for every kid that we sit down with and do a naming probe and then do MEI and then do another naming probe, that they're gonna demonstrate naming. It's just not. What I thought was really cool in that dissertation, for those that had conditioned seeing, but did not demonstrate naming, what I did was I just taught them the names of the things. Not looking at the pictures, just echoing. Just echoing. Once they could list the names of the things they were already able to draw, boom. Now they were able to demonstrate naming. So there's a lot more happening that we need to be able to control for before we start saying that MEI is this thing that's going to do it all. And it's got to be done piece by piece by piece by piece by piece. So all of that being said, to what end? What is the effect of naming? What is the significance of it? Why do we care?
and by acquiring the capability to learn incidentally, they can benefit from group instruction in a classroom.
Group instruction.
I'm sorry,
Well-
I misspoke. So they
Okay.
can benefit from instructional demonstration learn units. And then once they have observational learning as well, then they can benefit from IDLUs in a group setting.
Okay. So what is all that looking at? So model demonstration learn units are, this is the thing. All right, here's the name of the thing. That's not a learn unit. That's a naming experience. If you have naming, you can acquire that. But in a model demonstration learn unit, this is not a pen. This is a pen until I am told this is not a pen. If I'm doing naming, if I'm doing a naming probe or a model, a naming experience, and I hold up this and I say pen, and I hold up this and my kid is naming, they're going to say pen. Because they don't have any discrimination for what this is. So a model demonstration learning unit is going to now give positive and negative exemplars. So I'm not only going to learn the name of the thing, but I'm going to learn what the thing is not. I might learn what this is. This is my target. All right. So the model demonstration learn unit is a full learn unit. You provide whole learn units, I think. I think it has to be that way. And then you go and you test. What's this? What's this? And I never taught you. I never allowed you to contact reinforcement for those speaker responses. I didn't require you to echo. I didn't require you to draw anything. I didn't require you to take notes. You learn just through that demonstration. So now, the significance of that, and this is where I think it's important to, and I'm glad you clarified, Maddie, I think it's important to separate that from group work, right? That is how teachers teach. That is how parents inform kids. I don't sit down at a table with stacks of index cards and data sheets with pluses and minuses. Sometimes I wish they did. But this is how they teach. Stand up at a chalkboard and they talk about things. They walk around the house, they walk around the park, they walk around the zoo, they walk around the grocery store, and they talk about things. The ability to learn through those incidental opportunities is the significance of naming. Corwin, forget if it's Corwin, Greer, and Buttigieg, or Greer, I think it's Greer, Corwin, and Buttigieg, and then Allison Corwin's dissertation. She took a set of stimuli, gave model demonstration learn units, and then taught the things through, I can't remember if she did MEI or if it was just tact instruction or what it was, but looked at learning to criteria. Then she induced naming, model new set, model demonstration learn units, taught to mastery, looked at learning to criteria. Learning to criterion went something like 250 down to 80. Dr. Greer's line was always that students who go through, I don't think it was CABIS systems, but that have naming induced, that have OL induced, have all these pieces induced, learn 4 to 7 times faster than those that do not. He had those numbers before she had those data. Those data backed up his numbers. It's significant. And when our children have naming induced, we change the way we instruct. Because we no longer have to rely on direct contingencies for them to acquire new skills. You can just tell them. This is that, this is that. This is what we do with them. This is how it works. Smell it. Don't smell it too much. Don't taste it. We don't taste these, right? This is what we do with it. Tomorrow, go get me a highlighter. Show me what you do with it. Is this a pen? No. And all of a sudden, I can do all these things. The significance of that can't be understated. But that does not necessarily mean they can learn in a group. That definitely does not mean they can learn by watching others. And we'll get to that when we get to those social learning concepts. All right, but that's a really, really important piece. We have this Who was I talking with? Clarissa? Is this your and my conversation? You there? Black screen.
I am here. Keep talking and I'll remember.
Was that, were you and I talking about observational learning and naming?
We were.
Yeah, okay. We always have this want, many of us, myself included for a long time, had this want to conflate the relationship between observational learning and naming. They seem to develop around the same time. The interventions are these big fun things that are very different. They have to do with classroom style instruction, but they are different things. I do think that the presence of naming will confound an observational learning study. We'll get to that later. But just because a child has one does not mean that they have the other. Just because they have one induced does not mean the other will be induced. They are separate things, looking at separate establishing operations, looking at separate repertoires and separate instructional histories. They seem like they're like this, but they're not. They're really, really not. Observational learning, if you have observational learning, it might take you 200 learn units to learn something, which is not indicative of naming. But you might get those 200 learn units by watching someone else. If you have naming, it might take you 5 learn units to learn something. But you have to contact those 5 directly, whether through model demonstration or otherwise. You can't see Jimmy over there get it. Or at least it's not predictive of that. So those are definitely separate things that you have to keep apart. Okay? All right. That was a lot. That was a lot of me on a soapbox. Was that helpful? Was that helpful as a starting point? Okay, I'm going to stop there for tonight. Next week, we are going to continue this conversation. We are not done with it yet. We are going to talk about relational frame theory. So bring your I don't even know what, but the terminology is big and complex, and there's going to be lots of triangles being drawn on the screen. So get ready for that. We'll be talking about stimulus equivalence as well, because that whole thing has to go together. And we'll be talking about how, to the degree that I can, just how they all fit together. And it's going to be largely my opinion of things, but how they fit together, how they're separate, where I think people are right and wrong, and how we can put it all together. I'll do my best. Okay. All right. Any questions?
Plenty.
This
We
was-
don't have time, so we'll just wait for next week.
and feel free to shoot me emails if you're thinking on things over the course of the week. And yeah, we'll go from there. All right. Cool. Have a good one, guys. I will see you next week.